Welcome, everyone, to CDO's magazine series of one-on-one interviews with CDOs, data leaders, and key influencers. I'm your host, Robert Lutton, Vice President, Sandal Consultants. I'm coming to you today from Toronto, Canada, working with the CDO magazine. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Sid Dutta, who is the CEO and founder of Privaclave. I want to move on to a topic that is on the tongues of every person to talk about, which is generative AI. And, we've all seen within the last, 12 months, probably even a little bit longer, this rapid adoption of generative AI and the usage of large language models across and within the enterprise. And whilst these offer a great deal of productivity boost and the streamlining of business processes, however, with this rapid adoption, this is no doubt introduced a new area of concern for the privacy specialists. And there's no doubt a lot of risk that enterprises are almost inadvertently taking on. You know, with your experience and your role today, what's your take on this within the enterprises? What are enterprises not realizing what they're accidentally doing that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting topic, right? Because everybody is kind of talking about the adoption of LLMs.
Sure.
And it's obviously very rapidly getting integrated into the business operations and client-facing offerings, stuff like that. So the speed at which the development teams are adopting LLMs, large language models, has paced the establishment of comprehensive security protocols, and so basically leaving many applications vulnerable to high risk. So I think OASP, we had the top 10 for LLM application generative AI. That list got published, which obviously has quite a few areas, like prompt injection and, model denial of service, model theft and supply chain vulnerabilities, over reliance, excessive agency and stuff like that. Yeah, from a privacy and security perspectives, probably there are like three major vulnerabilities and risks, and particularly with, trading data poisoning, your insecure output handling. So those are obviously there, and sensitive information disclosure, basically, it kind of sums it up with there. So from the lens of data security and privacy, some of the vulnerabilities are like you could have, overfitting or memorization of sensitive data during the training process because you're trying to train the models, using some real sensitive information and personal information, and to have unintended, disclosure of confidential information due to lack of data scrubbing and stuff. And, some of the attack surfaces said that where you're like users are inadvertently putting insensitive data into the model, which is then reflected in output to the other users. In a lot of cases, the prompts could actually contain a lot of sensitive information. And basically that is going into these, LLM models. And, users are, trying to even craft prompts to bypass some of the input filters and eventually revealing sensitive information. And sometimes the legitimate users are exposed to data from other users, through the LLM.
Right.
So there's obviously a lot of, risks, particularly from a data privacy and security perspective. So, to address these risks, applications must incorporate some robust, data sanitization practices to prevent sensitive user data from entering into the training model, because the interaction between the user and the large language model, forms a two-way trust boundary, which basically requires vigilance in both the input and output handling. So restricting the types of data returned by the LLM can help mitigate sensitive information disclosure.
And I guess that would all need to be designed in the model, so the model knows that it shouldn't give away this critical information, this private information. And I want to move on to a topic that I will admit I had to actually look up because you talked about the data poisoning as a possibility. And this is where organizations are reaching out and adopting retrieval augmented generation, or RAG architecture, as it is called, to enhance the quality of the LLM outputs. So, Sid, because I had to look it up, I wonder if you might be able to explain what this RAG architecture is. And second of all, could you maybe discuss what you see as concerns with this particular type of architecture?
Yeah. So I sometimes, say RAG is risk amplified generation.
Right.
So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, because
True,
obviously
true.
Yeah, so retrieval augmented generation, RAG. Obviously, I'm not, a big fan of the naming, but it's kind of too late. It's kind of already there and caught on. But that's a technique, for enhancing the accuracy and reliability and timeliness of large language models. So that allows them to, answer questions about data they weren't trained, including, private data, by fetching relevant documents and adding those documents as context to the prompt submitting to an LLM.
Right.
As you are taking advantage of these large language models, but with, let's say, the public the LLMs that are available, and they have been trained, on previous data, which obviously is not something, and hopefully, they're not the private data that enterprises have basically maintained and secured. But in order to make that LLM to generate, more contextual and more accurate, output, sometimes, the prompts are augmenting, the input with some private information that they have actually stored privately.
Right.
So in that case, the LLM now has an augmented prompt along with some private documents. And it's also looking, for all the, pre-trained, data for which the model is going to work on. So now it has more information, and you have augmented that prompt with some private information, so which now the LLM can operate on, essentially create a much more contextual. So I think the concern is more about that how private information essentially is actually getting exposed into these public LLMs, and even in a lot of cases, for private, hosted environments as well. Because one of the primary concerns with RAG is this, from an architecture standpoint, is the introduction of this new data store called a vector database. And this involves, new infrastructure and new types of data, which are often copies of private data that's well protected somewhere else. Now, vector databases, they store what we call as embeddings, which are derived from private data, but they can be reversed, back to the near perfect approximations, of that original data, via inversion attacks. Now, given that it's relatively new, the security offered by vector databases is still immature, and hence could be an under-protected gold mine for attackers. The RAG's workflows, they are, unintentionally exposing overshared documents, so like in repositories like SharePoint, Google Drive, wherever. And worse, that data from domain-specific applications like your CRMs, your ERPs, your HR systems, and more, all are finding their way into the vector databases. Now, one of the interesting thing is that these databases don't have this domain-specific knowledge, right? Because you've got documents and information from several of these individual domains, and now you're dumping that as embeddings into the vector databases. The vector databases don't have that ability to essentially control that what type of data should be accessible to what type of user versus not the others. So basically, it's like there's no control who can see what, which leads to massive oversharing.
Right.
And AI systems are obviously great for surfacing information to the people who need it, but they're also great at surfacing that information to attackers. So that vector database, also is one of the new attack surface, for lack of a better phrase. So obviously, prompts from users, especially with the augmented data, can be incredibly revealing. And this sensitive data flows through systems that can be compromised or may have bugs or vulnerabilities that can be exploited. So at the end of the day, using private data in RAG workflows, that utilize third-party LLMs, are presenting newer risks, right? And even if you're running LLMs on systems under your direct control, there is still an increased, threat surface.
Sid, on behalf of the CDO magazine, we really appreciate the time, the discussion in depth, and also your knowledge. We certainly hope that we'll have a chance to have you come back, share your knowledge and experience on cybersecurity, data protection, data privacy, and generative AI. So thank you indeed for your time today, Sid.
Oh, it was a pleasure talking to you, Robert, and thank you for having me. And I think I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm looking forward to having many more.
Indeed. And for our listeners, please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews. Thank you.